wonderful to see so many people here tonight having a great time at this soiree. So I'm going to, at this point, I'm Jeannie Herman, the Adult Programming Manager at the Princeton Public Library. We're here with our teams from the library. I want to thank all of our Princeton Public Library employees who helped do this, as well as Freer from Morven Museum, who has been a great help. And right now, I want to welcome Morven's new Executive Director to the microphone.
Thank you so much, everyone. I bet you're all happy to be not sitting out in the garden. On behalf of the staff and board at Morven Museum and Garden, I want to welcome you to Morven. We are a National Historic Landmark. We are the home of one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence and 5 New Jersey governors. Throughout the year, we showcase our cultural heritage through our exhibitions, our educational programs, and our special events. I want to thank the Princeton Library. They are a wonderful partner with us throughout the year, and Labyrinth Books. And I'm so excited that we have these 2 authors with us today. I was just talking to them right now and told them that I am their new best friend because I've got 5 people that I need to shop for. I just want to remind, after this event, you're more than welcome to wander the garden. It is a little warm out there, but it is beautiful. And if you don't have a chance to do that, please come back and visit our exhibition that's up right now, or check out our website to see some of the upcoming programs. Thank you so much for coming, and I hope you have a really nice evening.
Just doing an adjustment. Oh, is that better for sound? Okay. Also, I'm short. Okay, so thank you, Rhonda, for the lovely welcome and for hosting the Summer Reading Soirée on the grounds of Morven this year. The library always loves working with the staff of Morven on events and other collaborations. We've been actually doing an entire series around civic engagement this year. And we have a lot of exciting events coming up this fall that will help. It's called So You Think You Know Civics, and it's really a good civics primer for all ages. High school and up is kind of intended towards that. So if you have high school kids, and a lot of it can be accessed online. We have the recordings online as well if you missed those. But anyways, the soiree has been an annual event since 2016, and it moves around from location to location. And this is the first time that we are here at Morven, and it's really great that they have air conditioning, because we have had venues where there hasn't been air conditioning. It's always the highlight of the summer for both our library staff and our community of readers. And so tonight's event features 2 authors who will be discussing their most recent novels, both of which are historical fiction. And so it means it's even more meaningful that we are having this soiree at such an historic site. In addition, both novels are filled with adventure and move across time with settings on different continents, which fits in perfectly with this year's summer reading theme of Adventure Begins at Your Library. If you are already signed up for summer reading, you can visit the library website to discover reading lists that have been curated specifically by our staff that highlight books from each of the continents. If you have yet to sign up, please talk to one of our staff members before you leave to find out how you can take part in this year's summer reading adventure. We have everything you need here to get started. I'd like to take a moment to thank our partner, Labyrinth Books, for being our bookseller tonight. And both authors will be signing copies of their books in the atrium at the conclusion of the formal part of the program. With all this being said, let's introduce our authors for the evening. We're going to have each of the authors come up to the podium, and then they're going to go to the chairs and have a little bit of a conversation, and then we'll have audience question and answer. That's the run of show for tonight. So first up to the podium is Anne Hood, who is the editor of Knitting Yarns, Writers on Knitting, and the best-selling author of more than a dozen books, including The Book That Matters Most, The Knitting Circle, The Red Thread, Comfort, and An Italian Wife, among many others. She is the recipient of 2 Pushcart Prizes, a Best American Spiritual Writing Award, a Best American Food Writing Award, as well as a Travel Writing Award, and the Paul Bowles Prize for Short Fiction. She traveled down from Providence, Rhode Island to be with us today, and she's here to discuss her latest novel, The Stolen Child. Let's welcome Anne to the podium so she can tell us about her novel.
That is so nice. standing and sitting. I was sitting with my back to you. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. If you don't mind, I'm just going to videotape you first. I have a wonderful publicist, and I have to show her how hard I work. She's on vacation in Canada, so where it's cool. So, you know, I think she needs to see us. If you have either of the books, would you hold them up? That's really good in the video. All right, get ready. Get those. Oh my God, they look great. Thank you. Wave. Oh my God, you're all so beautiful. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yay, thanks everybody. Okay. Usually I say hi, Erin, on that, but I forgot. Okay. So actually I came from New York City, not Providence, and I took the train. I took Amtrak, and it was delayed because the tracks were hot. And I'm like, I'm hot, but I'm moving. So I got really nervous, but we made it in the nick of time. So what I would like to do is describe the book and then read a short section of it, and so you can get kind of the voice. I think I came up with the idea for this story in a way because I'm at a point in my life when I'm just thinking a lot about what if I had done this instead of that? What if I had gone there instead of there? What if I had talked to that person sooner, you know, or whatever? And so I wanted to write a book in which a character makes a decision that he regrets, and that he tries to unravel the mystery of what happened as a result of that decision. So Nick Burns is in World War I, he's 19 years old, he's in a trench. He's scared, he's homesick, and he's even bored, because sometimes they were down there for quite a while waiting for the Germans to approach. And he's drawing on the wall of the trench, which is something they really did. World War I trench art is an amazing form of art. And when a woman, the farm wife, who's pregnant, shows up, and she's also an artist, and she kind of makes fun of him and teases him, and he gets a little crush on her. And when the battle begins, she comes to him and hands him two bundles. One has her newborn baby, and one has her paintings, which are really tiny because there's no canvases. She's had to cut the ones she has because it's war. And she says, save them. And he panics, and he leaves the baby and saves the paintings. And he leaves the baby in an abandoned village thinking somebody's going to return here, you know, either the American troops or the villagers, and he just hopes that happens, and it ruins the rest of his life, that one decision. So at the end of his life in 1974, he wants to go back to France and find out what happened as a result of what he did. And he's old, and he's a curmudgeon, he's had a kind of a crabby, miserable life because of what he did. And he hires Jenny, a young woman, I would say, who has moxie. She's like a cockeyed optimist, even though her life has derailed. Now, it's 1974, which is sort of my sweet spot. That's when I graduated from high school. So I named her Jenny because that's the main character's name in the love story that I loved, that movie and book so much. And she's voted most likely to succeed, which I was. I'm not bragging, but unlike me, my Jenny, my character, gets derailed. Her first semester in college, she gets pregnant, she has to drop out, she gives the baby up for adoption. And so, in a way, looking for this baby is something that's satisfying a need that she has as well. He puts an ad in the paper, and she answers the ad. And I'm going to read you that section where they meet and the interview. And basically, after this, the story is going to France and unraveling the mystery, and they travel through France and through Italy as they keep getting clues and dead ends, trying to find what happened to this baby. So that Nick left in August of 1918. So now it's 1974, and Nick has put the ad in the paper, and Jenny shows up desperate because she works at the International House of Pancakes near Brown University, which was a real place. And she is saving money because she thinks if she can get to Italy, her life will be better. So this is kind of like a perfect thing for her. The girl was all wrong. Nick knew that immediately. For one thing, she was too pretty. Pretty could be distracting. Not to him, not anymore, but others might find her distracting. He thought about the ad and those extra words he'd added. He should have said something like ordinary looking, or maybe bookish. But he hadn't, and now there was this girl on his doorstep with long auburn hair blowing in the breeze and bewitching green eyes and a big smile. She was holding the ad in one gloved hand. "Sorry," he said, "you're all wrong for this position." That smile, dazzling, lots of big white teeth, disappeared and confusion replaced it. Nick closed the door on her. Also, he thought she was too fresh-faced, the kind of girl people didn't take seriously, the kind of girl who would not be able to navigate airports and maps and the myriad other things he needed her to do. The girl knocked, repeatedly. "Hello," she called to him through the door. "Hello, can you at least interview me?" For another thing, he thought she was too young. He should have asked for someone middle-aged, or at least over 30. He should have been more specific. What if he got sick on the trip? This girl couldn't handle that. She'd be too scared, too inept, too, well, young. "Sir," she was saying, "my name is Jenny and I am perfect for this job because I have no responsibilities tying me down and I am free to travel as early as next week." Her words came out in a rush, making Nick think of waterfalls. See? Distracting. "Which isn't to say I'm irresponsible, because I'm not," she continued shouting through the door. "I work double shifts at the International House of Pancakes on Thayer Street in Providence, and I studied liberal arts at the University of Rhode Island for one semester." A waitress, he thought, a college dropout. He cracked the door open. Her smile returned, just as big and optimistic. "I was forced to leave college for a health concern that has been resolved," she said. And he could tell she'd practiced that line a lot. "You're too young," he told her. "I may be young, but I have lots of life experience," she said. "Have you ever been out of the country?" Before she could answer, he added, "and Canada doesn't count." "My dream is to go to Italy and visit Pompeii. That's why I work double shifts, to save up enough money to go there." "Pompeii," he muttered. "It's near Naples," she said. "It was destroyed in 79 AD after a catastrophic eruption of Mount Vesuvius." "I know what it is," he said. "I'm just wondering why you want to go there." She nodded. "I guess I'm interested in the secrets of history," she said. "But it's sad," Nick said. "All those people died there, burned to death. Actually," she said, "they were buried in ash and suffocated." Nick peered at her more closely. See, she'd shown up for a job interview and somehow they were talking about Pompeii. He needed someone who could stay on task. She was smart, though, he had to admit that. "Suffocated," he muttered. "Imagine walking down the street with your baby in your arms," she said, "on a hot August afternoon, and suddenly the sun is blocked by ash. It turns as dark as night and volcanoes erupt lava," Nick said. "Oh, not all of them," Jenny told him. "Am I hired?" she asked. She looked him right in the eyes, which was unsettling. "You're all wrong for the position," he said again. "What exactly is the position?" she asked. One thing he did like about her was that she hadn't shown up in blue jeans. Everybody these days wore blue jeans all the time, but she had on a simple black skirt and a wool car coat and fuzzy green gloves. "Sir," she said, "this position I'm so wrong for, what is it?" "I need to find a baby," Nick said. For an instant, she looked startled. She even took a step backward, as if he'd thrown something at her. "In France," he added. The girl took 2 deep breaths. "Sir," she said, "I am perfect for this job. I took 3 years of French and I got an A every year." "I don't think so." "I promise you, sir," and she even held up the gloved hand clutching the ad as if she were taking an oath. "I promise you, sir, we will find that baby." For reasons Nick could not understand, he found himself opening the door wider and shaking her hand. "We leave a week from tomorrow," he heard himself say.
Okay, so now we're going from a book that has ties to World War I and the present to a book set in World War II. And thank you, Anne, for that wonderful reading. It's the perfect introduction to this book to get everybody enticed to want to read it, in my opinion. So next we're going to have Laura Spence-Ash come up, whose fiction has appeared in One Story, New England Review, Crazy Horse, and elsewhere. Her critical essays and book reviews appear regularly in Plowshare's blog. She received her MFA in fiction from Rutgers Newark, and she lives locally, right here in central New Jersey. She's been at the library before to interview people, and we're also thrilled to have her here. Laura's book, Beyond That, The Sea, was a favorite for many of us on staff last year, 2023, when it came out. It's just been released in paperback. So without further ado, Laura, welcome to the podium.
Thank you, Janie, and thank you all for being here tonight on such a warm evening. It's nice to see you all. As Janie said, I live in Hopewell now, but we lived in Princeton for 20 years. My kids grew up, went to public schools in Princeton, so this very much feels like coming home. So thank you for having me. So my book is about a girl, an 11-year-old girl named Beatrix, who was sent during the beginning of World War II, during the Blitz, from London to live with a family south of Boston. She lives with that family for 5 years, and then she goes back to London. And the novel follows both families over about 30 years as their lives come together and move apart. So I thought what I would do is just read the prologue, so I don't need to fill you in on anything. You only need to know that it's 1963 when we start, and when Beatrix, who we're going to be with here, thinks back in time, she's thinking back to that time at the beginning of the war. Back then, Beatrix liked to sit next to Mr. G when he rode them all to the mainland. She would watch the town come into focus, the buildings growing larger, the white steeple in relief against the bluest sky. This was in Maine, where the family went each summer, and it was during the war, although that was hard to remember when they were there. Mrs. G often wore a pink or yellow sundress, her pearls tight round her neck, and she squawked about getting wet as William and Gerald splashed each other with water. Mr. G would roll his eyes and half-heartedly tell the boys to stop, his glasses spotted with sea salt, his tanned arms moving the oars forward and back in a smooth rhythm. When they got close, he would hand Beatrix an oar, and they would row together to shore. Once a year, they ate at the small restaurant in town that was located at the end of the dock. They sat at the same table every year, a corner table with 5 seats facing the water. This way, Mrs. G said, they could all watch the sunset sky change over the island, their island, the sharp spikes of the evergreen set off by the pink and orange streaks before the trees lost their edges as the sky grew dark. Not once in the years that Beatrix was there did the weather on this night disappoint. She was struck whenever she saw the island from the mainland by how different it was when seen from afar. It was beautiful, a blurry patch of green caught up between the ocean and the sky. It was also so small that she could hold it in the palm of her hand. When they were on the island, though, she was the one who was small. It was her whole world. It was as though nowhere else existed. They ordered clam chowder and corn on the cob and lobster, baked potatoes still in their tinfoil wrappers, the heat escaping from a vertical slice across the top. The first summer Beatrix was there, the boys started to crack open the hard red shells as soon as the plates were in front of them. Gerald was so excited that he was standing rather than sitting, and William was the first to find some meat, tipping his head back to catch the drips of butter. Beatrix slowly tied her bib, watching, and then took a swallow of water. Mr. G nodded at Mrs. G, who was seated next to her, and she patted her on the leg before she set to work on her lobster, pausing to let her see exactly what she was doing so that she could do the same. But that was all in the past. Tonight, alone in this seaside restaurant, Beatrix orders the lobster as the waitress lights the votive candle on the table. When the lobster arrives, she ties the bib around her neck, watching her reflection in the dark window. In August, she turned 34. 20 years have gone by. She often finds it hard to reconcile the girl she was then with the adult she is now. They seem like 2 separate people. For so many years, she has tried to forget. She smells the cuff of her jacket. The ocean is nestled into her clothes. She can hear the waves crashing onto the shore. This place, a town on the Firth of Forth, just outside Edinburgh, is flat, the wind rough. Islands and rocky outcroppings are scattered offshore. There's a wildness to it that reminds her of Maine. If she closes her eyes, it's almost as though she's there. She'd come back from her trip to America in early September and thrown herself into work. The new school year started in a blur. Someone was needing something from her. Days when she might as well have slept in her office. She spent so little time in her flat. In October, when she could finally slow down, she realized she felt adrift, unmoored. Seeing the Gregorys in America, standing with them in the graveyard, had brought everything back. The 5 years that she had spent there, the family she called her own for that briefest of moments. The grief at losing them, the grief she had worked so hard to bury. There she was, back in that familiar house, in the kitchen that smelled of lemon and cinnamon and butter, feeling Mrs. G's arms wrapped around her neck, her whispers in her ear. Once again, she hadn't wanted to leave, and once again she had. She had lost them all over again. She eats some lobster, but it turns out that most of the fun was in doing it together. She feels a fool wrestling with it alone in this tired and empty dining room. It makes her feel worse. She pushes the plate away and orders a coffee. The beam from the lighthouse is now visible, sweeping regularly across the Black Sea. There were nights when she and Gerald and William would sleep in tents in the woods, never far from the house, but they felt completely on their own, as though they were stranded on an island, the only ones to survive. The darkness was almost solid. They'd use their flashlights to walk down to the water and sit on one of the big rocks, shining the beams this way and that, then turn off the lights to absorb the black night, the whole world of stars shining down on the sea. She was happiest when she sat in the middle, when she could feel them on either side. Dinner in town was always capped off by a chocolate layer cake made by Mrs. G and brought over earlier in the day with cold scoops of peppermint ice cream. 3 fat candles to be blown out, one for William, one for Gerald, and one for Beatrix. Their names in fanciful blue script on the vanilla icing. "My August birthday children," Mrs. G said. "Another year gone by." The whole restaurant would sing happy birthday when the lit cake was carried out of the kitchen. The 3 of them stood and bent toward the cake in the center of the table, Mrs. G holding Beatrix's hair back from the flames. The restaurant was dark by then, the sun having set, and their faces were lit by the candlelight. Gerald, with his red hair and freckles, his infectious smile. William, his curly hair bleached blonde by the sun, his smile hidden from his face. What did they see when they looked at her? She doesn't know, except that she imagines her face must have reflected the joy she felt. When she thinks of the 3 of them together, she remembers this, the moment before the candles were blown out, as they all drew in their breaths, deciding what to wish for, and caught one another's eyes. That final summer, her wish was to stay, to be with them all forever. She leans forward now, blows out the flame in the Buddha, and closes her eyes. Thank you.
Okay, so if we can have Anne and Laura come take their seats up here at the front. And I'm going to ask them a few questions to get the discussion going. And then we'll also have audience question and answer. Okay. So, those readings were just wonderful. Again, great ways to entice everybody who have not already read these books to dive in. So the first question, nice easy one here. If you could each just take a few moments to share with us your journey to becoming an author. When was it that you first realized that this was your ambition or your desired career path, and how did you get to this stage? Want to go first, Anne?
Sure. Can you hear what's not? Is it?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. So I read Little Women when I was in 2nd grade, and as you know, Jo March becomes a writer. And I was so captivated by the story that I decided that I wanted to write books like Little Women. And I worked toward that goal. You know, I wrote a little newspaper that I sold to my family for 5 cents. Awesome about them. And then I did the yearbook and all the things that writers, and the school newspaper, all the things writers want to do. But I kept getting told that it was really hard to be a writer. I grew up in a small town in Rhode Island, an old mill town, very depressed economically. And it wasn't the kind of town that knew how to handle a kid with such big dreams. One day I went to the library and I took out a book called How to Become an Airline Stewardess. The first line of that book was, would you like a boyfriend in every city in the world? So I thought yes. And so I decided that if I became, by the time I was old enough to do it, they were flight attendants, but if I became a flight attendant, I would have adventures that would feed my desire to be a writer. So when I graduated from college, I went to work for TWA and worked for them for 8 years as an international flight attendant out of Kennedy Airport, and wrote my first novel while I was doing that.
And what was your first novel?
Somewhere off the coast of Maine. And in fact, I've been a little remiss because the emergency exits are...
So my story's a little different. So I wrote in college, thought that's what I wanted to do, but then, as it does for many of us, I think life took a different direction. I ended up getting an MBA and working in finance and marketing, then was home with my kids for a while, we moved here, and then I worked at Princeton for a while. But this was the thing, right? Like, so many of us have that thing in the back of our heads that we want to get back to someday, we're going to do that thing. And then my parents died within 5 years of each other, and that was the moment that I sort of took a look at my life and said, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? And that's the thing I want to do. I want to write. So I started going to some summer writing workshops. I got a story published. I got courage from that to apply to MFA programs. And as you heard, I went to Rutgers, Newark and got my MFA. And I graduated in 2016. And since then, I've really been in the writing world, writing and editing and teaching. Yeah, and then this book I've been thinking about for over 20 years, but finally got it to the end, and here it is.
Great. So there's a couple of genres that are very popular right now, including, how many in the audience have heard of romantasy? A few. Yeah. Romantasy is a combination of romance and fantasy, and it's got its own genre sub-label right now of romantasy. And it's all over book talk. If you're on TikTok, you'll know what I mean. I see a few my friends out there that know that. But historical fiction is, I think it's an enduring, popular type of fiction. And a lot of people turn to historical fiction as a genre. So I'm going to ask you both, do you find that there are unique challenges to writing historical fiction versus contemporary fiction? And I know, Anne, you've written both. And if so, what are the challenges of historical fiction?
I just want to make sure I'm doing the right thing. So it's funny because when I set out to write a novel, I don't think about what genre it is. I just like have an idea. And for this one, for example, I was so kind of obsessed about this trench art in World War I that I even wrote to the National Geographic photographer who was photographing it and asked if I could come see the trenches. And when he said no, I thought, well, I'm a writer, so I can see them in my imagination, and I created the character because of that. And it happened to be World War I, which I've always had a real fascination with. So much so that my son and I went last year to Sarajevo to step in the assassin of Archduke Ferdinand, who that started World War I. That's how much I'm like sort of obsessed with it. So I guess it was going to happen that I was going to set a book in World War I. That is just like the inciting incident, really, and then the book mostly takes place in the 60s and 70s. But I didn't think of it as historical fiction. The way I wanted to tell the story happened to take place in World War I. Of course, once you set a story back in time, it demands research, right? So I guess that's the challenge. But I was that kid who spent every Saturday in the library, so I happily will do that. It's also great procrastination. It's like, I know I need more research. I remember when I was writing the knitting circle, I was researching knitting. And one day I was in the library reading about Latvian wedding mittens. And I was like, I think I'm done. So I think I probably reached that point with this too, where I felt like I had World War I covered, and a lot of it takes place in Italy, so I had a lot of Italy. Stupidly, I didn't go there, I should have. But I had a lot of things to fact check and make sure we're right, and it's just so fun when you're looking up something and it leads you down these rabbit holes that lead you to something you're going to put in your book. So it's a challenge, but I think it's the most fun part.
Yeah, I like what you said about that it's not really about the moment in time, it's
Right.
about the characters
Yeah.
really, and that's the way I feel too. Like when I was writing this, I wasn't thinking I was writing historical fiction, I was just writing about these characters that I found really fascinating. And for me, I think true historical fiction is somebody like Hilary Mantel, who's
Yeah.
very interested in the moment, and she does a wonderful job with the characters as well, but often I think historical fiction is more interested in the moment than in the characters. And for me, the characters always come first, and it just happens that this is the time period in which they live. And as you say, an inciting incident very much is the same in my book, too. It starts then, but then
Yeah.
moves forward. But I, too, love the research and can do the research forever. And I had literally been thinking about this since probably, the late 90s. And I would just keep doing research and never write. And finally, after I'd gotten out of the MFA, I was like, okay, I need to just stop. I need to stop doing the research and actually write this thing. And then I could come back later and kind of fill in the gaps that were needed.
Okay. This actually leads me to my next question, which was, how much time do you tend to spend in the research phase when you're writing, I guess, any novel, but maybe in particular historical fiction? And how do you go about your research process? Is it, well thought out, or is it just research when you need to, or how does that work?
That's so interesting because I read an article, I think in the New Yorker, quite a while ago, and it compared, Malcolm Gladwell wrote it, compared two writers who had written historical fiction novels. And one immersed in research before he wrote, and the other researched as he wrote. So I guess you have to find which one works for you. I like to do it all up front. And the funny thing is, when I'm writing, I never look at the research. It's like I'm building a world. I keep notes. The day I begin a new novel, I'm so happy. I go to the stationery store and I get poster boards and highlighters and Post-its and all sorts of things. And I use them maybe one day. And then I just write. I might check my research just to make sure I'm getting a date right or something. But basically, I think I'm doing the research to build a world I'm about to enter.
Yeah, I agree. I did a ton of research in this case about World War II and about the Blitz and what London was like in the Blitz. And then by the time I really didn't spend any time at all in London during the Blitz.
Yeah.
But I agree. I think that's what you're really doing is creating this world. And I actually do like that sort of dipping in as you're going, because that's often where I find these really wonderful details to add in. There's a thread about postal chests in my book, and I was looking up just to see what the postcards look like, because this is how you play postal chess. You send cards back and forth with the notations, and I wanted to see what they would have looked like during the war. And that's when I learned that they were actually often either destroyed or redacted because they thought that the chess notation was actually code, right? And what a marvelous detail, right? So of course that went in the book, but that's one of the things that's so much fun about doing research is finding those little details.
And it's those little details that make it so realistic, and you never know when they're going to come in handy. And so how much do you rely on libraries for your research?
I do. I go to the library.
It's good.
I go to the Jefferson Market Library on 6th Avenue. It's kind of my favorite. I trek over from my apartment and sit there all afternoon. I love it.
Yeah. And of course, there's so many ways you can use the library digitally now. Just put that in there.
I always plug libraries.
So, in the world of book blogging and the bookosphere, if you will, there's really been a little bit of a debate lately about the date that a book can be considered as historical fiction. So books that harken back to World War I and II are clearly in the historical fiction categories, but yours, of course, both of you have books that go across time. But then interestingly, and you mentioned, well, much of my book takes place in the 60s and 70s. Well, The Women by Kristen Hanna is one of the most popular historical fiction reads of the summer, and it's clear that the Vietnam era is now considered clearly historical fiction. So, both of your books, they don't go beyond the 1960s. They are in that era. So, it's your opinion, because everybody has an opinion on this, it seems. How many years need to go by before a book can be categorized as historical fiction? And would, for instance, a book set in the early 2000s, in your opinion, be historical? Is a book about 9/11 historical fiction at this point? Or does it have to be 50 years? What's your ideas on that?
Wow, that's so interesting. I was going to say that I know so many writers who are setting their novels before 1986 because cell phones ruin their plot. And so to me, it's kind of before 1986, and that's just because I've had so many conversations with writers who are like, they can't get lost because they have Google Maps. They can't miss their meeting with each other because they would text, right? Oh my God, you're knitting, I love you. I have my knitting in my bag. What are you making? I'm sorry, I spent all my aggression. What are you knitting? A cow. Oh, nice, the color's great. Thank you. It's purple, just for everybody violet. And so in my mind, I've sort of set like the world before cell phones and after. But when you brought up 9/11, I suppose that is borderline historical fiction now. But we're really trying, I think the tech stuff is what makes it more modern.
I also think COVID is a thing too now, right? There's sort of before COVID and after COVID.
What was that? I don't.
And I know a lot of people who don't, were deliberately writing before COVID, right? Because you just don't really want to write about it for whatever reason. So I don't know. I almost feel like anything that's not set today is historical on some level.
Yeah. I guess you could have a book set in 2001 and not be about 9/11, so then with that, but if it was about 9/11, it's a historical event, so of course it's historical fiction. So there's a lot of different ways to look at this, and you're right, both of your books, I introduced them saying they're historical fiction, but they're not. They're really character-driven stories, as you both pointed out, and you really get caught up in the stories of the character, and it's just that they happen to have a historical setting. And so I think that is also a really keen difference to go on. Okay, so just changing tactics here a little bit. So part of the Summer Reading Soirée is talking about, having a chance for the community to come together with the community of book lovers, talk about what they're reading, possibly win some books, as we're going to do a raffle soon. So I'm going to ask some questions about your reading. So do either of you have an author or two authors that you automatically add their novels to your to-be-read list as soon as the book is announced? And if so, what are those authors? And as a tie-in, how do you tend to keep track of your reading or what you want to read? Do you have a methodology for that?
So when I was 10, a lot of things happened when I was 10. I love that. But I decided that I would read a book a week, and I've done that ever since I was 10. With some exceptions, for illness or whatever. But I wished I had kept a record of them. I regret that I didn't. I just made sure I went to the library and got out my book and read it, and I still do it. I drive my husband crazy because he's like, put the book down, talk to me. I'm like, I have to finish it because I have to start another one on Monday. I have to finish this book this week. It's like a thing I have. And so I wish I recorded them all, and maybe I should start doing that, actually. It's never too late. I think there are so many writers that I love, and I think you'd all probably say the same one, so I feel a little bit cliche, but like Elizabeth Strout, whenever she has a new book out, I rush to buy it. Tom Perrotta, Andre Dubusse III, these are some of my favorite writers. And I don't really have a methodology. I love the BBC, what's it called? Books and Authors, and it's called A Good Read. It's a podcast. And they have two people come on. Sometimes they're writers, they can be comedians, they can be actors, and a moderator. And they each pick a book, and they have to read the 3 books, and then they talk about them. And I have just found so many books that I never would have found by listening to that show. So it comes out like on Tuesdays. I highly recommend it. I also love, it's a weird period, I think, but like British writers from like the 50s, women writers. So Barbara Pym and Elizabeth Taylor, not the actress, Elizabeth Bowen, just from this era. Those are sort of my comfort reads.
Yeah, I have no methodology. I don't write anything down. It's horrible. I wish I did,
Yeah.
because I can't remember also if I've read a certain book sometimes. But my go-tos would be Claire Keegan, who some of you may have read, Small Things Like These. Ian Lee, who lives here in town and teaches at the university. I love her work, and I rush to get her books. And Colm Toy-Bean, who just came out with Long Island, which was the sequel to Brooklyn. Oh, and I'll add also Alice Elliott Dark. Her book Fellowship Point came out 2 years ago. It's wonderful. It's about two 80-year-old women who find themselves with land in Maine that they need to figure out what to do with before they die. And it's really a 19th century novel kind of turned on its head. It's really wonderful, and she's just a wonderful writer.
I'm very, I write down every book that I read. It's recorded, I know. It's kind of, it has to be recorded or I haven't read it. Actually, I think I have to write them down because a lot of my job also relies upon it. But anyhow, okay, so before we go to audience question and answer, because I'm sure our audience has some great questions, can you just share with us 3 books that you have read recently or wrote that you would recommend to our audience for their summer reading list?
So the book that I really loved, I read a couple of months ago, is The Bee Sting. I love that book. Is it Paul Murray? Yeah, Paul Murray. I love Irish writers too, so that's also a book. So The Bee Sting. I really love Night Watch, the Jane Ann Phillips novel that won the Pulitzer. I just read that a few days ago, and it kind of blew me away. So I highly recommend that. It is a very unorthodox book, so get ready, but it's worth it. It's really good. So those are the 2 that come to my mind.
Mine, the most recent ones would be The Sisters K, which is a response to The Brothers Karamazov by Maureen Sun. It's really, really wonderful. And it's a debut novel. And the other one would be The Alternates by Keelan Hughes.
Oh, I love that book.
Yeah, she's an Irish writer, and this is her 3rd novel. It's about 4 sisters, all who have PhDs, and one of them goes missing, and the other 3 come together to go find her. It's fantastic.
Okay, thank you. So Cliff, are you ready? So if you have a question, Cliff from the library is going to be coming around with a microphone. Just raise your hand and he will run the microphone to you. Okay, right over there, Cliff, we got a taker.
Sure.
Just need to get one person to get the ball rolling.
Have you experimented with ChatGPT in any way, and what are your thoughts on that technology?
I haven't experimented. I'm a Luddite. I don't know anything about technology. It's terrible. I couldn't even buy a train ticket. It was like... I almost cried. I was like, I'm going to have to call Laura, who I don't even know yet, and ask her to do this for me. But my husband did a funny thing. He showed me a short story, and he said, what do you think of this? And I read it. I said, the writing is terrible. And he said, oh, because I asked Chat, whatever it's called, to write a short story in the style of Anne Hood. And I said, well, it's learning.
I haven't done anything with it at all. In fact, it scares me a little bit, honestly, so I would like to stay away as long as possible.
And listening to your comments, it seems that both of you are drawn to kind of the theme of the lost child in some ways, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what drew you to that the lost child.
So, I don't want to bring down this lovely evening, but I did lose a child. In 2002, my 5-year-old daughter died suddenly from strep throat. And since then, I have been sort of pursuing this theme of grief and hope, like how you continue to put your pants on every day and your shoes and go out and live your life despite something like that happening. And so that's when I learned to knit. It helped save my mind in the year following that. And then I wrote the Knitting Circle because I wasn't writing. I'd already written 6 books, but I was sort of stalled. And my friend suggested I learn to knit, which I did. And that's all I did for years, I just knit. And I remember one day saying, I wish, this sounds like a Coke commercial, but I wish I could teach the world to knit. Like, people would be calmer, they wouldn't be so sad, you know, and the world would all have mittens and scarves. You would all be like, and then I kind of laughed, like, that's ridiculous. And then I thought, I could write a book about people who knit. And I hadn't written in over a year, almost 2 years actually. And I called my agent, we have the same agent, and I called her and said, I've got an idea for a novel. And she said, I knew you'd write again. What is it? And I said, it's about 8 women in a knitting circle. And there was a big pause. And she said, and they knit? And I said, yes. And she said, for like 300 pages. But that got me started again with writing. So the knitting actually helped me with my day-to-day stuff and helped me through this terrible time. And the knitting, and then the writing and the knitting came together. But pretty much in the books that have followed, that theme is there, sometimes more in the forefront, sometimes in the background.
And for me, so both my children were adopted, and I think, so this idea of creating family in different ways, and losing a child and gaining a child, all those, the feelings around that are very important to me, obviously, and so I think that's in there, and I think many great novels, many good novels are about the search for home, right? And I think both of these books actually do that too.
Thank you so much for coming out. It's been really wonderful to know your journey. I've read Laura's book, which is amazing. I'm waiting to read for your book. My question is, what is your writing process? How long did you take to write the book? How many revisions? And can you share about that?
So a novel takes me 3 to 5 years. Somebody had asked me that at a bookstore recently. When I answered, they were like, I'm not doing it. I thought it took like a year and a half. I'm not that interested, whatever, anyway. So 3 to 5 years. Lots of false starts and mistakes, and I sort of embrace all that. This is my 14th novel, so I've done it a lot, and I know that somehow I do figure it out, even when I feel pretty bleak when I'm stuck or when I think it's not going well. Revisions, so many. I can't even count. So the way I write, I sort of never have a first draft because I keep revising. So when I start to write, I read what I wrote the day before and I fix it. So I never get like a pure first draft, really. By the time I finish a draft, it's already a second or third draft, you know. And then I just keep revising it until I can't find one more thing to do to it, and then I send it to my agent, and she very nicely tells me all the things I still need to do. You continue the process.
Yeah, I write the same way, that I'm always revising, so I don't actually know what a draft is, because it just doesn't exist. For this novel, my debut novel, I started working on it in about 2005. And I would not continuously, like it went away for long periods of time, but then I would come back to it. But what really helped me was I took a year-long novel class, and there were 12 of us in that class, and over the course of that year, we all wrote novels. We all got to the end of something, and that was for me a godsend. Like that got me to the end of this thing that I'd never gotten to the end before. It was really wonderful. So I think some people, myself clearly, need that kind of structure, right? And now I know how to create it for myself, and so hopefully the next book will not take all those years. But I think you have to figure out for yourself what your process is.
So I'm actually a writer myself, and I'm writing my first book right now. And I have a pretty similar revision process where I keep going back and forth to revise. And I was wondering how you stay motivated to keep on writing, because for me, I'll often go back and I'll revise, like, say, a chapter, and then I'll feel demotivated because it's like, oh, it wasn't perfect, or like it wasn't even like very good or how I wanted it. So how do you keep writing, going through that process?
You know, I never expect it to be perfect, even when it's in a book that you can buy. That expectation, you have to, I think, kind of grapple with that. I'm so motivated. Like, all I want to do is write my book. And so even though I get stuck, and sometimes that being stuck lasts months, you know, where I can't figure out how to do what I'm trying to do, I'm still loving it, and I'm still motivated to do it. So, you know, they say, you know, if you want to write a book, you have to be so passionate about it because you're going to live with it for me 3 to 5 years. I've had ideas that I never really pursued because I realized I didn't want to live with them for that long, right? But when I'm writing a novel and I'm in it, motivation's not the question, it's finding the time to write every day.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the benefits of that class was because we had to produce pages and somebody was waiting for those pages, it forced me to produce and not go back in time. And I think maybe urging yourself to do that every once in a while, like just keep moving forward, write a new 30 pages, and then go back, might be a good way to break that habit of always, because I was doing that too, just going back and back and back, and you will never move forward if you do that.
I have a question. Hi, Laura. I've taken Laura's classes, by the way. They're actually wonderful. I wish she could be teaching next year, but she's not. I'm just wondering, knowing that I haven't been started, right? How do you stay disciplined? Do you all have, like, do you set up a certain time every day that you write? Do you write in spurts? How do you keep yourself on track? How do you keep yourself, like, disciplined?
So I have 2 answers to that. The first is, it took me a while to realize and accept and let myself know that all writing isn't actually at the computer. So I spend a great deal of time just thinking about my story and my characters, and that counts. So when I'm knitting, if I'm working out something in my book, or on a plane, you know, there are days when I'm traveling or doing book events, on a book tour, whatever, I can't write every day, but I always have the story in my head, and you have to give yourself permission to know that that's writing too. That if you didn't have that thinking time, it would be hard when you are at the computer. But for a regular routine outside of like book tours or teaching or whatever, I love my bed. I just love being in bed. I love my pajamas and I love bed. And I don't get out of bed till like 2 in the afternoon. I should have been like a Victorian woman writing my letters. I don't know. And so my husband's a writer too. And we live in a 411 square foot apartment with 2 cats. And so in the morning we like read the newspaper, and then we do all those puzzles in the New York Times that you all do also. And then he will get to work at about 10, and he goes next to the bed is his desk. And I stay in bed, and from like 10 to 11 I basically waste time. I call my cousins and gossip, you know, I watch reels of people raiding pizza in New York, like I do all that stuff. And then I'm like, oh my goodness, it's 11, I have got to start working, and I have a panic attack. It's the same every day. You know, it's just a game I play with myself. And then I write from about 11 to 2, at which point I'm like, kind of done. I don't know, there's the law of diminishing returns for me. I can't write for 4 or 5 or 6 hours, it just, I don't have it. I start getting stale. So about 2 o'clock, I'm like, done writing and time to get up. And I get out of bed and, you know, do all the things you do when most people are doing them at 8 in the morning. And then I usually take a big walk, like do my errands or whatever. And it's really important to me every day to knit and read as well. That's what kind of keeps me centered. And so I usually knit from 4 to 5 and read from 5 to 6. And then I have a cocktail and the rest is kind of my schedule.
Yeah, I don't have any sort of really regular routine, and the best thing for me, as you've already heard, is some sort of structure. So I actually have a group of people that I get together with once a month, and we share work with each other, and that's always my goal, is to have those pages done for them. We have no limit, it can be whatever it is, but I really need that structure to make sure I produce those pages each month, because anything that's, well, for sure any paying gig, so if I'm writing an essay or if I'm teaching a class, whatever it is, that's always going to come before my own work. And so if I don't have this other thing keeping me in mind, nobody cares, nobody knows if I'm writing, so I need that sort of accountability for sure.
Hi, I just drove from Providence, Rhode Island to get here tonight. I know you live here, but I grew up in Providence. And you said your sweet spot, Anne, was 73, 74, and that's sort of my sweet spot too.
Yeah.
But the real question for both of you is, having just read your most recent book, The Stolen Child, I could really see where Jenny was coming from, because I used to drink coffee at the International House of Pancakes on Clare Street. But it makes me think, and I thought about you, having read Fly Girl and knowing something of your background, having Jenny be one of your, one of your main characters in The Stolen Child. Was she the easiest one to write about as you wrote that whole book? And just in all of your writing, do you have some characters who are easier and some who are harder? I'm thinking of you having an easier time with Jenny and a harder time with Enzo, for example.
Enzo was my favorite to write, actually. I had a very easy time with him. So in the book, alternating chapters, like every 30 pages, there's a chapter called The Museum of Tears. And it follows a man in Naples who, starting when he was a teenager, collects people's tears and puts them in a museum. It's really just the back of his shop. He's an artist in Naples, Italy. He makes nativities. And talk about research that was fun. He starts collecting the 30s, and I Google famous people in Naples, Italy in 1930, whatever, and the first thing that comes up is an opera singer named Luisa Tetrazzini, who was so famous they invented turkey tetrazzini for her. So how can I not use her? I mean, that's so fabulous. But I loved all of that. He was my favorite to write. But I like writing them all because they're all challenging. So Nick is like a guy in his 70s who's ill and regretful and going on this journey, afraid of what he's going to find out. Well, that's challenging, but it's not really about the character. It's like their emotional truth, and that's always interesting to write about.
So Beatrix, who is the main character, she definitely was closest to my heart. She was with me the longest, I think. But I agree that you get different kinds of pleasure out of writing different kinds of characters. And sometimes the characters that are harder to access, in my case, William, who's one of the brothers in the States, he's sort of a very difficult character to get to know, and that was part of the challenge in writing him, was trying to figure out who actually he was.
Has a question. I have a really silly one. This is for both of you. Can we ever expect, I'm sorry, it could be really loud. Can we ever expect to read about all those international boyfriends that you had?
I'm free later, my trainer. Well, if you read, Fly Girl is my memoir about being a flight attendant, and so a few of them enter.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Maybe two. We're going to do 2 clips? Okay, we'll do 2 more. We got a lot of questions out there.
I have a question about how do you keep the voices of the characters genuine to their personality when you're writing them?
That is such a good question, and I wish there was an answer that I could give. It's really just knowing them. And I remember early on telling my agent that I was writing a novel with 14 points of view. And she said, I don't care if there's 1,400, but they all better sound different. And that just stuck in my mind. And I think when you know the character, so, my 19-year-old Jenny has to sound very different than my 76-year-old veteran Nick. And once you know them, you just syntax, the word choice you use, all of that. I also will say that I spent 8 years as a flight attendant listening to people talk. I mean, I just listened. I mean, sometimes they were talking to me, but mostly that was like, I'll have the beef or whatever. But like just sitting on the jump seat, you know, everybody talking on a 747, I would just hear so many conversations and so many different ways that people told stories. And so I think, again, it's that not writing, but being open, you kind of develop a skill for it.
Yeah, and one of the things that I do is I read everything that I'm writing out loud, and that I think is really helpful in listening. You know, if you just read it on the page and you don't read it out loud, you can skip over things, you don't hear it. But if you read it out loud, you can catch yourself and realize, oh, this character is sounding like this one, I need to make that change.
Here he comes. He's getting his steps in.
I'd like to know a little bit about your journey getting an agent.
So this is so not helpful, but I'm going to tell you because you asked. So I'm working as a flight attendant, and I'm writing my novel, Summer on the Coast of Maine. I'm writing it as connected short stories because I was like, I don't know how to write a novel, but I can write a short story. And my darling boyfriend, met on a plane, he said you should take a writing class. Like, we live right near NYU, you should bring your stories over. So I march over. I mean, I cannot, only the audacity of like a 24-year-old would do this. I go there, I go to the MFA department, and I read the names on the offices, like, ugh, I didn't like her book. I've never heard of him. And the third one is E.L. Doctorow. And he's sitting at the desk. And I say, excuse me, Mr. Doctorow, it doesn't even look up, yes? And I said, I'd like to take your class. He goes, okay, take it. Monday night. And I said, I brought my stories so you could read them. He goes, oh, I never read student stories, they're terrible. But I wasn't enrolled in the school. But I went to that class. And I even got a grade. I wrote the paper. It was so weird. So the same boyfriend says, well, next semester, since you're getting this free education, you should take a class where they actually read it. You know, so I went back, and this time I get stopped. They're like, who are you? Are you a student here? And I say, no, but I want to take a writing class. So I applied for a master's in American literature because I'm too nervous to hand in something to the creative writing department. But by being in that program, I get to take a class. And so I took one with the one that nobody signed up for because everybody wanted E.L. Doctorow and all those other people. And he was a retired editor from Viking. And he had worked with like Hemingway and Henry Porter and so many people. And he just liked these stories. And one day he said, come to my home, I want to talk to you. And my boyfriend walked me there, he was like patrolling, like, what is that? I see his head going back and forth. But this guy said, and this was like the day that really changed my life in a big way, he said, you've got what it takes. You're a writer and this is going to be published, I'm going to help you do it. And he called his friend who ran the Bread Love Writers Conference in Vermont and got me in. I mean, I didn't even apply. It was already, the application process was done. I said, I can't go. I work in the summer. I'm an international flight attendant. He said, no, you have to go. So I called in sick. I said, I'm going to be sick for 12 days. I go to Vermont, and I work with a writer named Nick Delbanco. And he says, I want you to send this to my agent when it's done. And that's how it happened. So it's not really that helpful because it was blessed, you know.
My story's a little different. So I took that class that I talked about before, and I finished the novel in the fall of 2019, and so I was ready to send it out to agents, and I started sending it out in February of 20. Perhaps we understand why, in hindsight, not a good moment. But I sent it to, I think, only 5 agents in that first round, and they were all people I had connections to somehow. I met them, or people were saying nice things about me. I only heard from one of those agents. Never heard from the others. And I was devastated. I just walked away from the whole thing. I went back to some short stories. I didn't do anything. Then by the following fall, I'd grown up a little bit, and I went out again to about 6 or 7 agents. Better response that time, but still ended up with no's. And then I went out again in February of 21. And one of the agents in that round is now the agent that we share. And right away, the next day, I heard from her assistant saying she wanted 50 pages. A month later, they asked for the full manuscript, and then I heard nothing. And I sort of got some interest from other people, but nothing had panned out. So now it's the beginning of May of 21, and I hear from another agent at that same agency saying that Gail, the original agent, had sent it on to her. Was it still available? I said yes. She read it and she passed. So now it's the middle of May. I think I'm done with this round, and I'm trying to figure out, do I have it within me to do this again? Can I go out on round number 4, or should I just put this away and think about something else? And then I got an email from Gail on a Monday night, third week of May, and she said, and this is where luck plays such a role in all of this, she said, I was away this weekend and I had my iPad and I couldn't sleep, and I opened it up and I found your manuscript and I started to read. So she wasn't looking for it, right? She was looking for something else. She was looking for something to read, and there it was, and she started reading it and she couldn't stop. And she told me to give her 2 weeks, and 2 days later she called and said, I would like to work with you. And then that was the third week of May, and it was sold the first week in July. So it just went like that.
So I think between those two stories, what it is you have to have chutzpah and perseverance. Right? You have to make it happen, and you have to just really believe. I think that's what it takes to be a writer, is what I'm taking away from this. Thank you both so much for such great answers, for so much joy.